Good day, masters and servants, and welcome to the Gilgamesh post-release analysis. And I've been really excited for Gilgamesh since he was announced. I wasn't a Fate fan before the Fate collab, but I have now watched Unlimited Blade work, so I'm a lot more invested in these characters. And I'm a free-to-play player, so finding out that he was being given out for free just made things even better. So you can basically consider this video the after guide. So after you've watched those videos that explain his kit or whatever, this video goes a little bit more in depth with which teammates work and how his mechanics affect his gameplay. And if you pay attention to the footage in the background, there's a few zero cycles snuck in there as well. So let's get into it. Alright, so let's talk about his energy mechanics. If you played a decent amount of Gilgamesh, you'll realise that his ultimate is where most of his damage is concentrated. Like with the right setup and the right buffers, he can basically one-shot at least one phase of any boss in the game currently. But the issue is he has an insanely high ultimate cost of 360, and the only way for him to meaningfully generate energy is from his A1 passive, which gives him 30% of the energy consumed when allies use their ultimates. This means that theoretically your allies literally have to burn through 1200 energy to give Gilgamesh his ultimate. And this really warps his team building, because in a lot of teams you literally can't generate that much energy in a short period of time. And this isn't really helped by the fact that Gilgamesh can only use his skill during his turn and it only generates 30 energy. Luckily for us, Gilgamesh starts the battle with half of his energy, so in order to get his first ultimate, your team only needs to burn through 600 energy, and this amount is reduced by using his skill and basic attack. So even with supports that have lower cost ultimates like Sparkle, you can still feasibly get at least one ultimate out of Gilgamesh. But obviously there's more than one wave of MOC, and a lot of bosses have more than one phase. So what do you do if you need more than one ultimate? Well, this is where we need to discuss Gilgamesh's team building and how his team can help him do more of what he does. So there are three main units that you really need to focus on when it comes to Gilgamesh team building, and those are Saber, Mortenax Blade, and Huo Huo. And if you have at least one of these units, you can make a very competent Gilgamesh team. Of course, there's some other units that you can use if you don't have these three, but we'll talk about those later. Let's start with Saber. Saber is the unit that Gilgamesh was designed to be played with, and as such the synergy is really strong, especially for Saber mains. If you're a Saber main, Gilgamesh is one of the best things to ever happen to you. So I recently picked up Saber, mostly because I literally just finished Fate Unlimited Blade Works, and I had to pull a Fate character. I can't lie, they got me with the collab. But anyways, Saber is undoubtedly the most fun unit that you can play with Gilgamesh, because his kit almost feels incomplete without having her on the team. So you might know already, but Gilgamesh buffs Saber by giving her a lot of attack and crit damage, and Saber buffs Gilgamesh by giving him more energy, and more energy means more ultimate, and his ultimate has the highest motion value in his kit, so getting to those motion values more frequently is a way in which Saber increases Gilgamesh's damage as well. And then obviously you have the exclusive joint attack that happens when Saber and Gilgamesh reach a total of 8 turns, and this follow-up is absolutely massive, not only because it does crazy amount of damage, it also gives a ton of energy to Saber, and honestly it doesn't actually do that much for Gilgamesh. You get like 3 points of interest, and the interest is a bit of a scam, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the fact that it does a ton of damage is a big nuke. It's something that you can play towards, like you speed tune your whole team around the fact that you get this follow-up attack, because it's likely to cause a chain reaction where the energy action advances Saber, and then she uses her ultimate, which gives energy to Gilgamesh, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the follow-up attack, but what comes after it that's really important. And the main reason why I consider this to be Gilgamesh's most fun team is because without Saber on the team, without this follow-up attack and all of this energy generation, you're literally only getting 1, maybe 2 Gilgamesh ultimates per battle, in a short battle anyways, as long as you're not taking 6-7 cycles. But it genuinely doesn't feel great to only have 1 or 2 ultimates, and Saber solves this issue better than literally any other character. There's no other battery in the game that does as much for Gilgamesh as Saber does, in terms of just getting him his ultimate. But Saber, the biggest weakness with this team is that Saber actually doesn't provide anything apart from energy and the follow-up attack. So Gilgamesh's quite high multipliers are kind of put to waste because he's not getting substantially buffed from that slot, whereas there's other teams where every slot on the team is giving Gilgamesh a meaningful buff, so he'll end up doing more personal damage in those teams where he's being buffed than in the Saber Gilgamesh teams. I also think that this team is a lot better than people give credit for. I know that Arch and Rin are literally destroying content all over the place, so it makes this team look a little bit worse in comparison. But I managed to zero cycle with this team and it wasn't that difficult, so I think if you know what you're doing, this team actually has a bit higher of a skill ceiling than the Archer team. So a skilled Gilgamesh Saber player will likely be a lot closer in performance to the average Archer Rim player, which is alright, I think, considering their top meta. And looking at the current drip marketing, it looks like we might be getting a new teammate for Gilgamesh and Saber in the form of Robin Samaretto. And if Robin ends up being this huge buff to the team, then this team might actually end up being one of the best in the game. Alright, let's talk about Mortenax Blade. Morty. So Mortenax Blade is a little bit of a controversial figure in the meta community right now because there are so many showcases that use Mortenax Blade. Every character wants him, like Acheron wants him, Ashvel wants him, some break teams want him, and now Gilgamesh wants him. And the thing is, Gilgamesh has particularly strong synergy with Mortenax Blade, so the teams without him often feel like something's missing, in a similar way to Saber, but obviously Saber, there's missing mechanics as well. But the thing that makes Mortenax Blade so synergistic with Gilgamesh is three main things. The insanely good buffs, obviously they're team-wide buffs as well, so whoever you're running in the third slot, either Saber or Ashvel or whoever, will also get those buffs. Second is his high attack frequency, which gives Gilgamesh a lot of stacks of interest, which might give Gilgamesh an extra turn given the setup. And also, this is the most important one, the way that he's able to generate and consume a lot of energy very quickly. Because his energy cost is 160, and he consumes energy when he enters his state and when he uses his ult in his state. And this actually batteries Gilgamesh a lot because there's no other support in the game that can provide as much buffs as he provides and use as much energy as he uses. So Mortenax Blade is just clearly best in slot for now. There are alternatives that you can use. E4 Welt is a massive one because he actually provides similar, if not a little bit better buffs, with the trade-off being lower attack frequency, lower buff uptime, and less energy provided to Gilgamesh. But he's still a strong alternative if you don't have Mortenax Blade. When I was just testing the meta stuff, I mostly tested the Saber Gilgamesh team with Mortenax Blade and the Gilgamesh Ashvel team with Mortenax Blade. And genuinely, I think Ashblade is just a better team overall. With the Ashblade team, I found myself just clearing a little bit faster and also being able to deal with a lot more different scenarios. Gilgamesh actually does a lot more damage in these teams because he's getting buffed from every slot, so even his skills dealing a lot of damage too. And the ultimate deals an insane amount of damage on these teams. So you end up having this added utility of a nuke that can almost one-shot every boss in the game on this team. And it is very, very useful because this team can output a ton of damage in a very short period of time. And if you literally have a nuke that can one-shot a boss, followed by Ashvel's ultimate, which almost one-shots a boss, followed by a Blade ultimate, which takes away a third of their HP, at that point there's no boss left. Like, the amount of damage that comes out of this team is actually really impressive, with the main anti-synergy being obviously the energy isn't as good as the Saber team, and Gilgamesh's self-defense shred buff, although useful in this team, is kind of a hindrance because you ideally want Mortenax Blade on a defensive shred Lightcone like Pearl's or Cypher's Lightcone, but Gilgamesh doesn't benefit at all from you using that cone, even though Ashvel would benefit massively on this team. And this team is a very, very strong case for E1 Gilgamesh. Obviously, it's good in the Saber team too, but in this team in particular, it's actually an insane amount of damage boost. You get more Gilgamesh ultimates, and you get an excuse to run Blade on either a damaging Lightcone, like his signature, or before the tutorial very easily, and still have an insane amount of output. So if you're a player who likes playing Gilgamesh in this team specifically, I would consider his E1 as one of the better vertical investments. The main issue that I found with the Ashblade Gilgamesh team is actually Mortenax Blade himself, because he is a HP scaler and Gilgamesh buffs attack. Huo Huo or your 4th slot often buffs attack as well. So having a HP scaler on the team, it really deads the vibe. Like, it really kills the amount of output that your team can potentially have. So if we get another slot who is a strong buffer, who could benefit from the attack buff maybe, or doesn't get hurt as much from not getting the attack buff, then this team could potentially be stronger having a replacement for Mortenax Blade or having that other character in the 4th slot. There's one tip I have for Mortenax Blade in these teams specifically that might help you generate a little bit more energy for Gilgamesh. So for Mortenax Blade, it's often common practice to save your ultimate when your ultimate's about to end so that you can immediately re-enter your state. But on a Gilgamesh team, you want to consume as much energy as possible, right? So the better option, just to maximize the energy output, is to actually use that ultimate, and then you regenerate 80% from Blade's passive, and then you use external sources to re-enter your state. So if you're only with Huo Huo, you can tune it so that Huo Huo's ultimate is used after Blade exits his state, so he's still able to maintain almost 100% uptime. You can also speed tune Blade with 139 speed, so he's 1 speed slower than his state. And if you do this, it means that once his state ends, he can use his basic attack, and he's already got a head start to enter in the next state, and entering the next state consumes energy. So you effectively double the amount of energy generation that you're giving to Gilgamesh in exchange for a little bit lower uptime on your Mortenax Blade buffs. So next up, we need to talk about Huo Huo. If you want to run Gilgamesh with a sustain, it has to be Huo Huo. Obviously, you can use other sustains like Gallagher or Lingsha, who also have the ability to generate energy through like Lightcones or whatever. But Huo Huo is infinitely better than the other options. It's kind of like a Casteris Hyacinth situation. And this is mostly because Gilgamesh is able to double dip with energy generation when an ally uses an ultimate to generate more energy for him, because he gets the energy from the generation passive. So in Huo Huo's case, 20% max energy, and then he also gets a refund from Huo Huo using her ultimate. So he would get another 42 energy on top of the 20% energy that he gets from the ultimate. And it's an insane amount of energy to provide in one go. And there are very few characters that can even come close to providing that much energy to Gilgamesh. And because Gilgamesh has such a high energy cost, he also gets another 24% attack from Huo Huo's passive. And Huo Huo being a healer means that you can run Mortenax Blade on any set, not just the Guard of Wuthering Snow. So you usually want to build Huo Huo on Quid Pro Quo, but there are some scenarios where you want to be using post-op conversation just to get more ultimate uptime for your Huo Huo herself. So if you don't have Huo Huo, you're kind of cooked a little bit. There are some other things that you can try. You can try using Lingsha, especially on the Watcher's Lightcone, because she's able to spam her ultimates a lot. And if you spam your ultimates, you give more energy to Gilgamesh, but it just doesn't compare to Huo Huo. You can try Quid Pro Quo Gallagher, because he's able to get an extra turn, which gives an extra 16 energy to Gilgamesh most of the time. And that's not bad. It's not bad. It does something, but it's not as good as Huo Huo. I would say the reasonable alternative to using Huo Huo is just go sustainless, because this guy is insane. Like, he's actually really strong when it comes to just dealing damage, right? He's good at dealing damage. And if you run sustainless teams with Gilgamesh, you will be seeing numbers that you've never seen before. And if you're able to properly utilize his nuke ultimates properly, you can get really good performance out of endgame content. And speaking of sustainless, let's talk about RMC. RMC, obviously, you guys already know, this guy is an insane support already. Like, they've been an insane support for like a year now, actually. Old ass character. But RMC is really good with Gilgamesh. And this is mostly because Gilgamesh increases the charge efficiency of Mem by a lot, because anytime an ally uses their ultimate, the 30% refund also goes to Mem's charge as well. So effectively, you have potentially 30% increased charge efficiency with Mem. And that's actually insanely good, because you just end up advancing your team over and over and over and over again. So there are even some scenarios, especially in the Gilgamesh Saber team, where you could potentially action advance 3 units on the team, which is insane, all things considered. And Gilgamesh gets a ton more true damage because there's a passive that RMC has that gives you more true damage based on your ultimate cost, and Gilgamesh has a very high ultimate cost. The main issue though is the true damage buff itself is reliant on your teammates providing good buffs as well, because it gives you basically a 50% final damage multiplier, but if there's nothing to multiply, 0 times 5 million is 0. So if you don't have another team member on the team who's providing substantial buffs, the true damage buff actually doesn't feel that impactful overall, right? So if you want to make a really strong meta team that's comparable with the tier 0 units, you really want to be playing with RMC Sustainless, because that multiplier does so much more when you're getting buffs funneled into your character. But you can still run RMC with Sustain, especially in the Saber teams, but I just felt like those teams really paled in comparison to the Mortenax Blade and Welt teams that had insane amounts of output. So I'm going to just quickly cover Welt. Everyone knows Welt is really good. He works really well because of defensive shred as well, and the buffs only get better at E4, but you do not need E4 for this team. What you do need for this team is E2, because if you don't have E2, you can't cycle ultimates in the way that you'd like to. And a decent part of Welt's value on this team is the fact he's able to cycle his ultimate very quickly. Welt is probably the best alternative for Mortenax Blade if you have him. And also consider that if you have a team with Welt and Mortenax Blade together, Mortenax Blade starts giving the team 75% ultimate damage bonus, and guess whose ultimate hits hard? Gilgamesh. So having that ultimate damage bonus on Gilgamesh means he hits insanely hard on these teams. Like, it might not be the best in terms of like synergy and stuff, but just for damage per screenshot, Gilgamesh, Welt, Mblade, whoever else in the last slot, maybe RMC, maybe Sparkle, who you like. Yeah, who you like. And that will be your highest damage per screenshot on Gilgamesh. So next up, let's talk about 4 stars. You guys know I love 4 stars already, so I'm not going to give you the whole spiel. But there are 3 4 stars that I think synergize really well with Gilgamesh. Tingyun, Pela, and Yukong. Let's start off with Tingyun. So it's kind of obvious how they could potentially synergize with each other, because Tingyun provides energy to Gilgamesh and Gilgamesh wants energy. But unlike Huo Huo and Sunday, who provide percentage energy to Gilgamesh, Tingyun provides a flat amount of energy at just 60 energy at E6. And in theory, this 60 energy should be less than the 72 energy provided by both Sunday and Huo Huo's ultimates, but you can use a Tingyun tech to make it even more than what's provided by both Huo Huo and Sunday's ultimates. So to maximize your energy spend on Tingyun, you want to have Huo Huo on the team as well. So the idea is that you use Tingyun's ultimate on herself. So you give Tingyun 60 energy straight off the bat, then you immediately use Huo Huo's ultimate to refill Tingyun's energy, and then use Tingyun's ultimate again on Gilgamesh. And at this point, you would have given Gilgamesh 2 ult refunds from Tingyun, as well as the flat energy from her ultimate. And with that much energy consumed, she becomes the best character at giving Gilgamesh energy when paired with Huo Huo, at a whopping 130 energy from those 2 ultimates used. And it's even better when you run her on the Eagle set, so you don't necessarily even have to use a Huo Huo ultimate. As long as you get those turns quite quickly, so using your ult on yourself just gets you to your next ult much quicker anyways. And obviously using these ultimates back to back gives you multiple instances of dance 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 if you're using that Lightcone. So that's really strong because that's around 50% action advance just from a Tingyun. And yeah, it's good. It's good. The only issue is Tingyun actually doesn't provide that many good buffs. She has an attack buff which isn't that big, as well as the damage bonus from her ultimate. But the problem with that is that it just doesn't really cut it in this day and age. We want some higher quality buffs for our Gilgamesh, ideally. And her best set in these teams is the Eagle set. But the problem with that is you don't have Sacrados anymore, so you're missing out on even more buffs. Anyways, Tingyun is a good option if your other options are busy. So if you don't have a Sunday, if your RMC... In fact, I thought Tingyun was better than Sunday. Let's be so real. Sunday is washed. And this team is really rough for Sunday because you can't really speed tune it properly. You can, but it has to be scenario specific. You have to change your speed tuning in every fight in order to ensure maximum value from Sunday's action advance. Whereas with Tingyun, you genuinely don't have to worry about changing your speed tuning in every single fight. And she provides more energy. But I will give it to Sunday. Low key, the halo looks really good on Gilgamesh. And he's still a good option. It's just... anyways, that was a side tangent. Sunday's okay. But you can replace Sunday with Tingyun. That was my point. So the team will look something like Gilgamesh, Tingyun, a third strong buffer, and Huo Huo. And the reason I say strong buffer is RMC is not going to cut in this team, because Tingyun's buffs are so little that the amplification from the true damage, as I said earlier, just won't cut it. So this is a team where you would ideally want to play more premium buffers. And when I say premium, I mean premium. For the Tingyun teams, we're looking at E4 Welt, like E2 Mblade, like E2 Cyrene type vibe. Or you could run a sustainless team to make up for the lack of vertical investment, but you lose the Tingyun tech where she's able to use back-to-back ultimates by not having a Huo Huo on your team. Next up is Pela. I found Pela to be quite good, especially in pure fiction, and she actually got a small buff in the last patch that just passed with the Divine Querying Mastersmith stat, which gives an extra 15% damage bonus team-wide after you apply a defensive shred debuff, and that's what Pela does. Her whole kit is defensive shred debuffs, right? And it synergizes really well with the defensive shred in Gilgamesh's kit. And if you have something like Cypher Signature Lightcone, you can get very, very close to 100% defensive shred with just having a Pela on your team. Pela also has really strong energy mechanics, so she's able to spam her ultimate very, very frequently, especially in pure fiction, where she gets energy anytime an enemy dies, right? And if you're cycling ultimates, it means that Gilgamesh is also getting more energy. Unfortunately, Pela's ultimate is only 110 cost, so Gilgamesh doesn't get that much, but the frequency that she's using them, these 1 turn, sometimes 0 turn ultimates in pure fiction, can help you battery Gilgamesh a lot while providing a decent amount of buffs. Not as good as Welt, even at E0, but it's something if you're using a Welt, because Welt is one of those characters that's very wanted, especially if you pulled Himiko Nova recently. So next up is Yukong, and I really want to open you guys' eyes to the magnificence that is Yukong. I've been playing a lot of Yukong since the Mortenax Blade post-release, and I've realized she's just super underrated, and the problem is a lot of people just don't really understand how to play her. And to be honest, there aren't that many teams where she shines, but recently we've been getting a lot of teams that deal a majority of their damage in a very short damage window. And I think that should lead us to reevaluate the meta position of Yukong. The thing is, Yukong has some of the strongest buffs in the game. She gives an insane amount of crit value and a very high amount of attack, to the point where she's literally comparable to some of the great buffers in the game. And at this point, her buffs are even better than someone like Sunday, considering he's not a team-wide buffer like Yukong is. Obviously, there's the issue of buff uptime, but if 80% or 90% of your damage happens within that short buff window, then there really isn't that big of an issue. And this is especially the case for someone like Gilgamesh, where his ultimate is a large majority of his damage, So if you can just get Yukong's buffs on that ultimate, then it's actually good enough to make up for her lack of consistent buffing. And I am really glad that I tested Yukong, because it opened up my eyes to a new playstyle for Gilgamesh, like a different playstyle from Saber Gilgamesh and Ashblade Gilgamesh. And that's the one ult man nuke Gilgamesh playstyle. So basically the idea behind this playstyle is you accept the fact that you're only going to get 1 or maybe 2 ultimates in the whole battle. You know that you're not going to get that many. And what you do is you stall for as long as possible, stack up the best, highest quality buffs as possible, and use those ultimates to one-shot all of the enemies. So it's very similar to how you would play main DPS Rin, but where Rin is gaining her gem energy to unleash a really powerful skill, Gilgamesh is gaining energy for his ultimate so he can unleash those really high multipliers. And I realized that for these teams, my favorite supports were Welt and Yukong. And RMC was a really good slot as well, to be honest. But Welt is just really good for stalling, because you can stall with the delay on his ultimate. And since you're in sustainless, it allows your team to stay alive long enough to generate Gilgamesh's ultimate for the eventual one-shot. So then we have Yukong, and the reason why I like Yukong is because number one, it's fun to use Yukong, but she also provides insanely high quality buffs. So especially for a 4-star that doesn't have any stat requirements, and because she provides so much stats, you can change your Gilgamesh build to refine it and improve your build quality to try and get as much damage as possible to ensure the one shot. And her biggest weakness being buff uptime doesn't matter if the enemy is dead after one ultimate. This one ultman team was specifically good in Apocalyptic Shadow because you're able to use the time that the enemy isn't broken to generate as much energy as possible. And then when the enemy is broken, you have a damage window where you can deal a massive amount of damage. Like in the most recent Apocalyptic Shadow with Yukong, RMC and Welt, I was able to hit 26 million with one ult, which is insane. Obviously you have the buffs that you're given from Apocalyptic Shadow itself and the buffs that you can pick as well. So the damage isn't accurate, but the fact that I was able to immediately one-shot the boss shows how much damage it is. Both times as well, both phases, like you plan it out, stall, get your buffs, one-shot the boss, next phase, stall, one-shot the boss, next phase. It's really satisfying, low-key. I think if you're a free-to-play player who doesn't have a lot of the other options like Ashblade, Blade or Saber, then this team is actually really good because all of the units are quite accessible. You have RMC, which is free, Yukong, which is a 4-star and easier to get, and then a standard banner character in Welt. And because we're moving into an endgame environment where you need 3 teams, having this one Altman nuke Gilgamesh team with mostly free or accessible units to clear at least one side can be very helpful. And in this most recent Apocalyptic Shadow, I got 3,500 AV, and that's enough to ensure that you get your stalwart mode badge as long as you perform decently well on the other sides. In fact, it gives you some leeway on the other sides. So even though it's a bit of a mishmash team, it's enough to clear certain endgames, so that's good enough for me. Tribbie can be a really strong option if you don't have Mortenax Blade, especially if you have their E1. Like some of the other options, they have really strong energy mechanics that allow you to cycle through ultimates as well, which batteries Gilgamesh. Their biggest issue is that they can't really benefit from the attack buffs that Gilgamesh provides, and in this day and age, their buffs are a little bit lackluster, especially when characters like Welt exist who have defensive shred, which is a higher multiplier than what Tribbie can provide. Another unit that I've really been enjoying with Gilgamesh is Harmony Robin, and I've specifically been really enjoying her in the Ashblade teams or in teams with either Mortenax Blade or Ashvel. And it's mostly because the attack buff that Gilgamesh provides actually applies to Robin as well, so you get more value from running a Robin instead of running something like Tribbie who's HP scaling. Another thing to note is that Robin's ultimate is relatively high energy cost, so it synergizes quite well with Gilgamesh because you're able to front load a lot of energy. Robin's action advance is also very good for Gilgamesh because you can time it to be right after his turn to maximize the value of it. With a normal action advancer like Sunday or RMC, it can be a little bit difficult to perfectly time your advances, but with Robin, you get to choose your ultimate timing. I actually got a 0 cycle running Mortenax Mblade, Ashfell, Robin and Gilgamesh together. From my testing, this Sustainless team was a little bit better than the Tribbie team, and which makes sense considering my Robin's E1 and my Tribbie's E0, but it performed a lot better than I expected. This is partially because both Ashfell and Gilgamesh are attack scalers on this team, so Robin's buffs go really far. There are some issues, of course. She doesn't actually contribute any attack frequency apart from the action advance, and because she's not really cycling through ultimates, you don't end up funneling a lot of energy into Gilgamesh over the entire battle, which may be a little bit frustrating if you want to ult a lot on Gilga. But obviously we have her SP coming and it looks really good for Gilgamesh, so maybe there might be a team where you run Gilgamesh, Robin SP and last slot. I also want to talk about one character that I don't actually have, but actually still works surprisingly well with Gilgamesh, and that's Cyrene. Even though Cyrene herself doesn't consume any energy, the fact she's able to instantly activate your ultimates means that you're able to access those multipliers back to back. And in the right scenarios, when you're using the one ult man team, the nuke setups, it can be enough to just clear a battle within 2 or 3 ultimates. So Cyrene is one to look out for, especially if you have E2, especially in shorter battles where 1 or 2 ultimates is enough to actually clear the whole phase. So I think I've spoken about most of the notable teammates that he has. So we're going to move on to the builds and Lightcone section of the video. And honestly, Gilgamesh really surprised me with the amount of build variety that he has. I think I've seen most people using the Scholar set because it gives you both skill and ultimate damage bonus. But overall, it doesn't give you that much damage bonus. And the fact that your skill is what's being buffed the most isn't that helpful considering that most of your multipliers are in your ultimate. But in most cases, this is going to be one of your better sets. Then there's the Quantum set, which gives you defensive shred and even more defensive shred against quantum weak enemies. And this set can be really strong when you're running other defensive shredders on the team, like Mortenax Mblade. But in the team with Ashblade, you are overcapping on defensive shred if you run this set. So this set is a no-go for an Ashblade Gilgamesh. And then I've seen some absolute demons use the Eagle set, but I think this is only really useful in the Saber team because any other team, you're ulting once, maybe twice. And then at that point, what is the point? Like, just move on to another set. Before I mention my favorite set, my personal favorite set, I want to give an honorable mention to the Wave Strider Captain, which can be a really good set, especially in the nuke Gilgamesh, the one ult man Gilgamesh. If you're focusing specifically on his ult damage and that single instance, but you also need to be applying buffs on him to get your stacks. So let's talk about my favorite set, and that's going to be the Poet set. I am not sure if you guys know this, but Gilgamesh can actually fully use the Poet set. Because his speed buff doesn't apply until he's in battle, the Poet set still activates and it can give him up to 32% crit rate. And 64 CV is huge, is a lot. So if you have the artifacts for it, artifacts? They're called relics in this game. If you have certain relics that give you stuff like attack percentage, it can be really good for Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh notably doesn't give you any crit rate buffs in his kit. So having this crit rate buff from the artifact set allows you to use a crit damage chest much more easily and allows you to more fully utilize the crit damage that Gilgamesh gets from his own passives. The main reason I really like this set, and not just like it because it works, because in a Saber team you have a really strong follow-up attack, and if you have the Scholar set, it doesn't buff follow-up attack damage, but this set would apply to Gilgamesh's portion of the follow-up attack damage because the crit value just applies to everything in his kit. This means that there's often scenarios where the Poet set will be better than the Scholar set. If you access that follow-up attack at even one more time than the Scholar set, you will just be dealing more damage on Poet set. And I know a lot of people farmed a lot of the Poet set for their Casterus or maybe their Tribbie, so you might have a few good pieces lying around, And if your crit ratio is just looking a bit dodge, like, just go for a poet set. I feel like a lot of people don't know it works, so they're scared to use it, but genuinely is one of his best sets. For his playnars, the best in slot for his damage is the Cosmic Life Sciences Institute, since it gives him a ton of damage bonus, and notably Gilgamesh is lacking a damage bonus buff in his kit, and a lot of his teammates don't provide meaningful damage bonus either. So since he can make full use of this set, it becomes his best in slot. There's one more planar that I really want to talk about, and it's specifically for his Saber teams, and that's the City of Converging Stars planar. This planar notably gives a team-wide crit damage buff when an enemy is defeated, but it also gives a 24% attack buff after an ally does a follow-up attack. And guess who does a follow-up attack? Gilgamesh in his Saber teams. And it's actually quite interesting because this follow-up gives a lot of energy to Saber, and Saber uses her ultimate, which gives Gilgamesh energy, and he's likely to use his ultimate very soon after this follow-up attack. So even though it's a short 2-turn attack buff, Gilgamesh can capitalize on it by using it for his ultimate. And honestly, given a team-wide buff and being able to use some of the set effect actually makes this a really strong option in these teams. Okay, now for the two main build questions. Lightning Orb or Attack Orb, and Speed Boots or Attack Boots. For the Orb, Lightning Orb is better for the same reasons why his planar set is really good for giving you damage bonus. He lacks quite a bit of damage bonus in his kit, so a Lightning Damage Orb is just better. For the Speed or Attack Boots question, bro, I'm telling you, like, from the bottom of my heart, I tried my hardest to calc a definitive or something close to an interesting answer for this question, and after all of my trying, I can't give you a definitive answer. Because of how speed works and how Gilgamesh's passive works, where you can get speed at irregular intervals, it makes it very difficult to calculate how much speed he's actually getting unless you make a ton of assumptions, and after a certain amount of assumptions, it's just fake. Like, at that point, you're not even playing the game anymore, right? So there'll be scenarios where speed boots will give you an extra turn, and there'll be scenarios where you don't get an extra turn by running attack boots. But sometimes you have to consider, is it worth even getting that extra turn? What does that give me, right? For Gilgamesh, it gives you an extra 30 energy from using your skill, and it consumes your interest. And there'll be some scenarios where that 30 energy is worth it, and some scenarios where it isn't worth it, or you want to save that speed so that Gilgamesh is the first one to act in the second wave. All of this to say, attack boots or speed boots, I don't know, but oftentimes attack boots just tends to be a decent amount better, considering that you can replace that 25 speed that you get for 3 stacks of interest, and it's easy to get 3 stacks of interest. And using attack boots also enables you to use the poet set as well. Something I need to mention that's notable but not really that important is that having more speed actually decreases the value of the speed that you get from his passive, because it's fixed at 9.7 speed per interest, and the way that changes in speed are calculated in this game is using this formula, which means that having more speed to begin with gives you less overall value from each stack of your passive, but it's really not a big deal. It's like very minuscule diminishing returns on each stack. One overall tip for his stacks of interest is that you kind of want to get as many stacks as possible when you're further down in the action value bar. If you get a bunch of stacks right before your turn, it's literally not going to change anything. Like, you're going to stay in the same action order. The thing is, I said that interest was a scam earlier, and it's mostly because you need so much speed in order to like overtake enemies and actually get a decent amount of turns. And this passive just doesn't give Gilgamesh enough consistent speed to reach those breakpoints that actually really matter. So often your Gilgamesh is capped out at around 3 turns per cycle, which isn't great. Like, you can get that on a 200 speed character quite easily with a DDD or whatever. But the thing is, I could just be lying to you as well, because the way that the speed works and the interest works, there might be a scenario where you get 4 turns. Maybe you get a bunch of energy refunded and you get a bunch more interest. It's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell because there's just so many variables involved. Basically, what I'm telling you is just play the damn game. Play the game, play it for yourself, and see what you need to change in it. If you need a little bit more speed so that your Gilgamesh gets the turn, play the speed boots. If you don't need it, play the attack boots. Like, I think it's really important for Gilgamesh, even for just the energy stuff, that you actually try to reset with different gear configurations to see if it actually changes anything, because there's small changes that you can make to actually increase Gilgamesh's output by a lot. Like, he's a very high skill character, not just in terms of playing, but in terms of actually strategizing and coming up with a good plan. So for his Lightcones, he has 3 premium options, with his signature Lightcone being his best in slot for damage and for team-wide buffing, to be honest. You have Saber's signature Lightcone as well, which isn't far behind, and then you have Finon's signature Lightcone, which I think is really strong, especially since it gives base speed increase, which increases your passive, how much it gives you as well. So you'll be going very, very quickly with Finon's Lightcone. It is important to note that Finon's Lightcone, the damage bonus doesn't apply to the ultimate damage itself, but only to the damage you deal the turn after because of how it's worded. So it's not as good as it could potentially be, but it is still a really strong option. Be careful of overcapping on defensive shred if you're running an Ashblade team. But yeah, apart from that, his signature Lightcone is really good. Saber's is really good. Now let's talk about the free-to-play options, because this is where a lot of people have been struggling. Especially if you're playing a Saber team, you might have noticed that there aren't really any good options for the both of them, because the best option often is on the fall of an Aeon, because it's just a really strong Lightcone. It gives you a bunch of stats as well as damage bonus, which Gilgamesh really likes. The problem being, you only get one of those. You can't get multiple copies because it's from the Herta Store. So who do you use the fall of the Aeon on, and who do you use the other Lightcone on? Basically, the first answer to this question is whoever can break an enemy gets the Lightcone, because you can only activate the passive if the enemy is broken, right? So if you're against wind weak enemies, Saber gets it, and if you're against lightning weak, give it to Gilgamesh. Alright, so now that's solved. Okay, but what if there isn't any wind weakness or lightning weakness? Then what do you actually do? So there are other options you can use. Both Gilgamesh and Saber are really good users of the Moles Welcome You Lightcone, because they can get maximum stacks on the passive, and it just gives you a ton of attack percentage. So both of them can make good use of this Lightcone. A Secret Vow can be really strong, but that's only if you trigger its passive, and you're only really doing that in sustainers teams. But if you can do it, especially in the nuke team, it can be very, very impressive. For me personally, I got quite lucky, or unlucky, however you see it, and I pulled the Ilia Lightcone. Yeah, I'm a Fate LARPer right now, yeah, Ilia Lightcone. And that's been helping me quite a lot, because it means that both Saber and Gilgamesh get an option of a high base attack Lightcone. And Clara's signature Lightcone, Something Irreplaceable, isn't actually that strong. It gives a decent amount of attack, but that's about it. It doesn't give that much. In fact, Aeon gives more stats than this Lightcone, but the passive is a lot more easier to trigger. All you need to do is get attacked. Whereas for Fall of an Aeon, to maximize its passive, you need to break an enemy, and that's not always going to be easy. So there'll be some times where you have both of these Lightcones, and the character who has Something Irreplaceable will be dealing more damage than the character with Aeon. So basically what it boils down to is, if you can activate the Aeon passive, whoever can activate it gets the Lightcone. And if you can't activate that passive, then it doesn't really matter, but it is preferable to use the stronger Lightcone on Saber, because she's going to be dealing the most damage on this team. So let's talk about his current place in the meta and what I see for his future potential. So currently he's quite good. He's a lot better than what people are saying, in my opinion anyways. But you actually need to know how to play him. But if you're missing a few core teammates like Saber, Mortenax, Mblade, etc., his performance kind of tanks a little bit, unless there's specific scenarios which are able to increase his output, such as Apocalyptic Shadow refunding your energy. If you're a Gilgamesh main and you want him to last for long, I would really suggest getting his E1. It's a really strong increase to the Mortenax Mblade teams, and it also is just good quality of life in general. I don't have it, so I'm not certain how it really feels, but the extra 40 energy from using your skill actually helps a lot, and it incentivizes you to use action advances because you actually get a benefit for getting more Gilgamesh turns rather than him just getting a turn. So if we look at current beta information, there's some good news and some bad news for Gilgamesh, right? So the good news is that Robin Someretto looks like she could potentially be the best in slot option for a lot of Gilgamesh teams because of the energy and other synergistic buffs that she provides. Because of Robin's action advance as well, there is a lot of potential for skill expression in these teams. I wouldn't be surprised if these teams really outperform their expectations. The bad news though is that it looks like Aventurine Wave Flare is going to be his replacement in the Ashblade team if you're using him in that. With his E1, he has a little bit more staying power in that team, but it looks like they're designing Aventurine to be best in slot in that team. So if you're planning on pulling Aventurine and you're already using Gilgamesh in this team, then he kind of loses his spot. In a case like this, where you're planning on pulling Aventurine, I would suggest either getting Gilgamesh's E1 or getting Saber so that you can actually form other teams. Gilgamesh actually has a ton of future potential, more than I think people realize, because of how his energy mechanics works. It's all about consuming a ton of energy, right? And if you get his E1, you have a meaningful buff to the team. It's not massive, you get some attack, defensive shred, and a little bit of crit damage. But if we get other supports and damage dealers who consume a lot of energy, then he could potentially be an insanely strong sub DPS. Like imagine if we got a support like Cyrene, who consumed 300 energy anytime she used like her mini ult as well. Like that would make Gilgamesh insane, and it's very likely that we move more into energy mechanics in the future because there's a limited domain of what H-Star can explore. So as long as the HP inflation doesn't become too much where his multipliers don't matter anymore, getting new supports and sustains that generate a lot of energy for Gilgamesh will improve his performance a lot. So I think that basically covers everything. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't, but at least you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments as well if you're a Fate fan, if you pulled any of the Fate characters and what teams you're playing. I'm really interested, especially if you pulled for Rin. So far, Rin's my favourite Fate character, so I'm interested in her main DPS teams. I might pull for her, so let me know what you've been cooking up with Rin. Subscribe if you want to, and bye!